It's me. Hi. I'm the problem. It's me. Sorry, I took over. So last week we talked about I'm the problem in our marriage. Just me.
Was that Taylor Swift making a
Swizzle.
Okay. Let's get into that. Before we jump into today's show, I wanted to ask you to check out our website, brand new website, marriagebydesignpodcast.com. That's marriagebydesignpodcast.com. All of our episodes are available there on that website. Love to have you pop over there, follow us there, and check it out.
If you have a topic that you're wanting more information on or you have questions about, you can search on our website by topic, which is a really great feature.
That's right. And more than anything, guys, please share this with someone that would find it meaningful for them. Without any more delay, let's get to the show. Hey, everybody. I'm Nathan Warnock.
I'm Andrea Warnock, and you've joined us for Marriage by Design, a time where we get to talk to you about God's design for marriage, what the Bible has to say about that, and how we live that out practically.
And also a time where you get faster and faster saying that.
Do I? I'm just trying to get through it, I guess.
So we have started a series to kick off season 5 of the Marriage by Design podcast. And the series is called Marriage and the Gospel. And we started last week by talking about there's a reality of the gospel message and a reality of us. And the reality for us is that this whole thing going on around us, this world, our relationship with God, ourselves as created beings, and our marriages is not about us. Yet we so easily want to take over the show, don't we, with this, what we call this me mentality. And one of our prayers for ourselves and one of our prayers for the Marriage by Design community is that we can, through the empowerment of the Holy Spirit, we can have this sort of me mentality alarm that's going off in the back of our minds that helps us to know when we're letting this me mentality creep in.
Yep.
So what we want to talk about today is how can we identify that me mentality? What ways do we see this interfering with us in marriage? Right?
Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you, since Nathan and I started, that became like the forefront of our brains. It's like, I feel like all day, every day that I'm struggling with this.
Yeah, me too.
Oh my gosh, I'm the problem. And not just in my marriage, not just in the marriage, but in life in general.
Yeah.
Like I'm constantly realizing, well, I'm so selfish.
Yeah.
And so many of the decisions that I want to make or reactions that I want to have are just born out of selfishness.
Right. And for us, I think you can really reach a next level in your relationship with the Lord when you start realizing that this life is a calling to sacrifice.
Yeah.
And it's really hard to do, but the first step is identifying that there's a problem and recognizing, hey, how does this creep into my life? And so I wanted to go through 4 ways that we see this start to impact marriages. And certainly you can apply this to relationships outside of marriage, but we're in this context, we're going to talk about it with regards to marriage.
Yeah.
So the first one is, first way that, sorry, did I cut you off?
No, I was just going to say him.
Okay.
Sorry.
The first way that the me mentality claws its way into our marriage is through what?
Your priorities.
Your priorities. So what do we mean by that? What
you put above other things. You know, you'll if you have chosen to give your life to Christ and allow him to be the Lord of your life, if you're willing to say, okay, God, where are my priorities and are they messed up? You can see really quick. I've gotten some things out of whack.
Yeah. I mean, you've probably heard said, I know we certainly have, that if you want to know where your priorities are, look at where you're spending your time, talent, and treasures.
Yep.
right? I mean, what things are boulders in your bank account? What are you spending money on? What are you spending your time doing?
I would say your thoughts too should go into that.
Yeah, this actually. I mean, yeah, I think from your thoughts probably come your priorities, and there are so many times that we see or have an opportunity to meet with couples where their priorities are all about the stuff they want to do, right? It's all about my career. It's all about, and when I say all about, like I'm saying from moment to moment, right? These are the things that are causing conflict for them. I'm not saying they're, necessarily completely blowing off their family for their job, but it becomes clear that through a pattern of behavior that the job is the priority. Why? Because it's my thing.
Right.
And it's easy to justify that. I would see all kinds of justifications going on about, well, I'm providing for my family with regards specifically to career. I'm providing for my family, or I'm, we have this nice house, and I'm just, and that's all fine. But the question is, what's really the priority at a heart level?
Yeah, and one of the excuses that can be really nefarious is, well, I'm, my job or getting out of the house to work for a while or whatever is important because it's good for my mental well-being or my emotional well-being. We've that's become really a buzzword. And I'm not saying that your well-being isn't important.
Sure.
But oftentimes we're using that as an excuse to focus on ourselves.
Right.
So, yeah, career, job, just getting out for focusing on me, whatever that looks like, can become a priority over the things that should be above that.
As a Christian, our well-being comes through intimate relationship with the Lord and in trusting Him. This is why Jesus specifically commands us against things like anxiety, because anxiety points out a foundational disconnect between our understanding of who God is meant to be in our lives and who we see God as in our lives. And that disconnect creates anxiety in our lives because we're going, I got to figure this out and I can't figure out how to do it and it's never going to come together. And Jesus' response to that was, look at these birds, right? I even provide for them. How much more would I provide for you as my child? So
yeah, it's a desire for control.
Right. Sure it is. Yeah, sure it is. Which again is a me consideration. Mm-hmm. And man, those got to be killed. So the first me mentality that claws its way into marriage that we see is with regards to priorities.
Yeah, and under the Lord, our priorities should be our spouse, our children, and our family, and then kind of as God directs from there.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And when those get out of whack, it starts causing conflict, and the conflict generally revolves around my priorities and her priorities, in my case, do not line up. And so I'm preferring my priority to her priority when the calling is, it's not about you. Prefer others above yourself. Okay, the second way that the me mentality claws its way into your marriage is through what, babe?
Your assumptions.
Your assumptions. Right. So here's what I'm thinking about here. And this is a nefarious one, but man, if it doesn't wreak havoc in marriage. When you think about your spouse, when they say something to you or they do something, is your first assumption, even subtly, they're doing this to make me mad. They know I don't like this, but they're doing it anyway because they're trying to show me up, or they're trying to make me look like a bad spouse, or whatever.
So much of the battle in marriage is the battle between your ears.
Yep. That's right.
Because you're allowing thoughts to take over that probably aren't even real. Thoughts about what your spouse is doing or how they're thinking or whatever. And rather than assuming the best about them or asking them, like, is this the situation? We just assume. And then there's this battle in our marriage that really just started in our head and isn't even real.
Right. And again, so often those assumptions, it's very rare that we talk to a couple and they start opening up and they go, you know what? Every time he does something, I just assume he loves me and he's just trying to care for me.
Sure.
Right. Most of the time it is a self-focused assumption, right? My spouse is trying to harm me. They're trying to not care for me. They're trying to disrespect me. They're trying to be unloving towards me. Me.
And the reality is that that's not necessarily, at least in our marriage, that sometimes, I mean, for sure in our marriage, it's not like that's ever our spouse's desire is that, oh yeah, I'm trying to make their life harder or I'm trying to deprioritize them.
Right.
Sometimes it's just, there was no ill intent. It's just that the other person is thinking about themselves over their, they've got the priorities wrong. They're not trying to, frustrate. He's not trying to frustrate me. He just maybe isn't putting the priorities right.
That's right. So when it comes to the battle going on within our head, that's really the question is, are you thinking of your spouse as a person that loves you and is in this together with you? Or are you choosing to let your mind run away with you with regards to your spouse's intentions? And this can be really difficult, particularly in a situation where perhaps in the past your spouse has done some things out of poor intention.
Mm-hmm.
But again, giving that over to the Lord in forgiveness and release of bitterness as required, and then trusting the Lord to make those intentions known takes away the assumption piece of it. Because then rather than going, because at the heart of that is not just the assumption, but also then I got to stand up for myself because nobody's going to stand up for me if I don't. And that's what creates the conflict. Now you've just transferred that over to the Lord and said, Lord, I'm going to trust you to deal with this. I'm going to assume the best about my spouse and let you handle his or her heart.
Right.
And deal with that. It's really important. And another way that this assumption piece comes in.
Hold on before you go. Sorry. Can you remember that?
No, yeah.
In heart care, which we've talked about, if you don't know what that is, it's okay. But in heart care, we talk about, can you assume that your spouse is a good-willed person? And if you can't, then you're saying they intentionally think of bad things to, they wake up thinking, how can I make this person's life worse or miserable or whatever? So for everyone that we've ever met with in heart care, the spouse can say, yeah, I do believe that this is a good-willed person. Then you need to assume that all the actions that they're taking are good-willed. Maybe they're not the correct priorities, but they're at least good-willed. And I think that that's a super important point to make when we're struggling with that battle in our heads of, oh, he's just trying to do this. We need to go back to, no, I believe that he's a good-willed person and that he's not trying to do whatever negative thing I'm thinking of.
Right.
And so I think that's a super, super important part of our assumptions is going back to, no, I believe that he's a good-willed person or she's a good-willed person. And so then I'm going to assume that they're not trying to negatively affect me.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Another way that these assumptions can creep in isn't always negative, right? It's not always thinking, hey, my spouse is trying to do something to harm me. Sometimes it's assuming ulterior motives, which can really wreak havoc in a marriage as well, where we're, I'm assuming that, he's only, I've asked him many times to help get the kids ready for bed. This time he actually took the kids up and helped get them ready for bed, probably just that he's trying to have sex tonight. And see, then you've completely undermined this potential ministry and blessing that your spouse has done for you because you're just assuming that he's trying to get something out of it. And the same thing can go the other way too, right? With regards to, she's just trying to get something out of me. Instead of just going, hey, I'm just going to trust that they're doing this to show love and or respect for me. And if that's not the case, I'll trust that the Lord's going to ferret that out.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay, so your priorities, your assumptions, The third way that the me mentality claws its way into your marriage is through
Your rights.
your rights, right? So this is kind of based off of that. We see this in movies where somebody gets arrested and, they're there with the police shaking their fist and going, I got my rights. And of course we roll our eyes and think, shut up, right? But yet in our internal monologue does the my rights thing a lot. Right? I mean, I'm in the and we see this one gets to be a little more outspoken, I think, in the marriage community, where people, even Christians, are like, well, the Bible says this is how. Look at Ephesians 5. As a wife, Andrea should be respecting me, and that means I have a right to be respected. And she's not respecting me, so I have a right to react poorly.
You'll notice the Bible doesn't say, men, be sure that your wives are respecting you. Women, be sure that your husbands are loving you.
Yep.
It talks to wives, respect your husbands. Husbands, love your wives. So the onus is on the spouse to do the respecting or the loving, not on the other person to make sure that that's happening to them.
Right, and that perfectly aligns with what we know about the gospel message. The gospel message is that you and I individually make a choice to seek and follow after the Lord. That's what we do individually. He doesn't force us to do it. He extends invitation through the loving kindness that he showed through his son Jesus on the cross, but ultimately we have to make the decision to do that. In marriage, we are only in control of
Our
us.
part. Mm-hmm.
And so we need to better understand what's our part. And the me mentality piece is, instead of becoming proactive about fulfilling your role in marriage, we become all of our own defense attorneys. And then all of our own sort of bodyguards, where I gotta get my spouse in line because I have these rights and my spouse isn't respecting these rights. And so I need to deal with that. And we deal with that through slandering our spouse to other people. We deal with that through, angry outbursts or withholding affection or whatever the case may be. But we start becoming our own bodyguards and in fact go on the offensive against our spouse because, darn it, that's going to show them.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that is really just that me mentality coming out in our mind and going, hey, I've got my rights. He or she's not respecting those rights and I need to do something about it. When the reality is the only something we can do about that is to give that over to the Lord and say, Lord, I'm hurting in this area. Hopefully you've created an environment in your home where there's opportunity to sit down and talk about these things. But honestly, here's how this ought to happen in a marriage where you're actually focused on each other. You sit down and say, Andrea, in what ways
Don't say
am
Andrea
I...
if that's not your spouse's name.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Spouse. Insert spouse name. What am I doing that is making you feel unloved or disrespected?
Yeah.
Right? See, then it's not me going, hey, sit down because I need to talk to you about what you're doing to me. Because that's just guaranteed to flare up a me mentality in your spouse. Right? Instead, focus on ministering to your spouse because, again, that's the calling. It's not about me. It's about my spouse in marriage. Why? Because at the end of the day, Christ's death and resurrection was about us as the people he loved, not about him, and we're called to reflect that in our marriage. So proactively seeking your spouse and defending your spouse's biblical rights as opposed to focusing on your own.
Yep. Good
So
stuff.
your priorities, your assumptions, your rights. And the last way that we see the me mentality clawing its way into marriage is
You
through
first.
what? Yes. So the whole you go first idea. So what do we mean by this,
I don't know.
babe? So
I don't know what you're saying.
when people have issues in their okay,
Yes.
go ahead.
Like, I'll do the right things, but you go first.
Right.
You do it first.
That's exactly
like,
it.
It kind of goes back into I deserve. Like, well, I deserve to be loved, so I'm not going to respect him until he loves me. And of course, if he's doing the same thing, then you're just going to stay on that cycle rather than saying, "No, I'll go first." And it's between you and the Lord if you're not going to get on a healthier cycle with me.
Yep.
But I'm going to choose to treat you the way the Lord has asked me to treat you, and
Yep.
I'm going to choose to do it first.
Right.
I'm not waiting around.
Yeah, we run into this all the time. In fact, if you go through the comment section of a lot of our videos, this is where me mentality shows itself in the comment section, because
And
a
it can
lot of
happen in
people
our
are
own marriage,
going,
too.
of course, a lot of people are going, hey, I'm hearing what you're saying about this topic, but you don't know what my spouse has done.
Yeah, it really comes from I don't deserve to be treated like this. And why would I treat my spouse in a way that they don't deserve because of the way they treat me? But isn't that the gospel message?
Right.
Aren't we treated by the Lord in a way that we don't deserve?
Right.
I mean, God sent his son down to earth to live the perfect life, become this the sacrifice that we needed for our sin to give us a perfect relationship with the Lord, eternity with the Lord, which we can choose. But he did all that knowing there's going to be plenty of people who choose to completely reject me, and
Yep.
not only reject, but some people spit in his face while they do it.
Yeah,
Yet
they
he
did.
still chose to do that for the opportunity of having relationship. And so if our marriages are supposed to be a reflection of Christ's relationship with us, so our lives should model that. Yeah, sure. I mean, you can admit there are definitely marriages where you can say one person does not deserve to be loved or respected.
Right.
Okay, they don't deserve that. But is that the example that Christ gives us? Is that what God says in his word? Only love them or only respect them if they deserve it. No, because then our marriage becomes, number one, not a reflection of Christ's relationship with the church, and number two, a performance.
Mm-hmm.
And the scripture talks about winning over an unbelieving spouse by your actions, and that doesn't have to do with just an unbelieving spouse, but that has to do with a spouse who's off base in how they are in their marriage. I mean, you can win over a spouse to your marriage by how you choose to treat them in a way that they don't deserve, in a good way. I mean, that can massively change another spouse's attitude towards their own marriage.
Right. And again, is a reflection of the gospel message, and the way that Christ's love for us changes us as we better understand
Yeah,
that.
I mean, we're willing to take that gift, but we're not willing to give the gift
Right.
to our spouse. That's, when you think about it that way, that's crazy.
Yeah, and this really gets to the point we're going to start getting into next week, now that we've kind of talked about the me mentality problem, which is, here's the honest truth, guys. If you are struggling, and I mean settling really more than struggling. We all, at any given moment, I struggle with making my marriage about me. And Andrea and I can get on the crazy cycle with the best of them, of getting focused on ourselves,
Totally.
and getting snippy at each other, and angry, and sitting in that, and not being as forgiving as we should. But if you're settled in that, right, if you are just, you're
Accepting
committed
that.
to, hey, my marriage needs to be about me. And this, you can only know this in your own heart, because of course not very many people are going to say this out loud, but you better get serious in your own mind about thinking, how do I think about my marriage? Because here's the bottom line. If you're just okay with your marriage being about you, I'm not entirely sure you understand the gospel message to begin with, which should scare all of us who are professing faith in Christ, if we don't actually understand the thing that we're saying we believe. And that's really the challenge that I want to lay out there for Christian couples is, look, if your marriage is quote unquote on the rocks, and you're going, well, it'd be better if my spouse would just treat me this way, or, it'd be better if she would, or he would just, and you're just in this crazy cycle, and you're going, well, this is just where I'm going to be until she figures it out, or this is just where I'm going to be until he figures it out. I don't think you understand the gospel message. And you need to get serious about going back to the Gospels, going back and reading John and reading Luke and understanding what it was that Christ did for us, because the same calling and emotions and choices that are involved in submitting to Christ are involved in submitting to God's design for marriage. It's uncanny how those two things line up with each other. And so it's really hard to say, I understand this one thing, but not this other thing. And so that's the challenge, is to start thinking about, and we're going to go into detail on how those things line up next week. But for this week, the question is, these things, the me mentality, is it creeping into your priorities? Is it creeping into your assumptions? Is it creeping into your rights, your view of your rights in marriage? Is it creeping into having a, well, I'll do it once my spouse does it, this kind of you first mentality? That's the me mentality. That's your flesh rising up and going, darn this other person, darn God's design for marriage and the thing I'm called to. This needs to be about me because I'm important too. And is there some justice involved in that? Do we all want to be treated fairly? Yes, because there's a part of us that reflects God's justice. But there's the part of us, the difficult part of this, where we recognize it's not about me. And actually, God's sense of justice should motivate me to minister to my spouse because of the work he did on the cross for me and the reflection that marriage is of that sacrifice. That's understanding the gospel. And if you truly understand that, yes, you can still have difficult times in marriage. Yes, you can still struggle in your marriage. But by making it about the other person, you create this beautiful picture in marriage. And it's amazing to me how often, even if you have a spouse that's not a good-willed spouse, how that motivates them, one, to love you more completely, and two, most importantly, points them to Christ.
Yeah, it's great stuff.
All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you being here. Love to have you check us out, our new website. That's marriagebydesignpodcast.com. And we will see you guys again next week. Until then, remember, God is for your marriage.
Thanks so much for listening. We just wanted to say, if you have a comment, a question, something that you're struggling with, or need prayer, please reach out to us. You can get a hold of us by emailing marriagebydesignpodcast@gmail.com, or of course you can comment on any of our social media and we will get back to you. But if you have something private, feel free to email us. We're happy to personally respond to you.
That's right. And we do respond to every comment that we receive, either through our website, through YouTube, through our social medias, which leads me to, feel free to pop over to our website, marriagebydesignpodcast.com. You can leave comments on any of our videos through that site. We would love to be able to connect with you, but please don't hesitate to reach out. Even if you just need prayer, you need someone to hear what you're going through, we're here for the Marriage by Design community, so feel free to reach out anytime. Until then, guys, thank you so much for joining us. We'll talk to you next time.